Hello and welcome to Cooking the Books with Heather. Today we are going to be making barbecue baked beans. Actually, we're going to start them today. We're going to finish them tomorrow because we're making these from dried beans. So I have dried navy beans and we have to soak them overnight. So if you forget, there are several quick soak methods, but we are going to go ahead and soak them tonight as the recipe calls for. So often you want to sort of pick through your beans, see if you find any rocks or anything. Sometimes little bitty rocks get stuck in there just because of the way they're processed and they're similar in size and all of that, or one looks just not great, and so you pick it out. These all currently look okay, but I'm going to cover these with just cold water from the tap by at least 2 to 3 inches. Do that. Okay. So sometimes you'll have little bits of the skin, I don't know what that's called, of the bean that gets separated and will float to the top, but I don't see any of that there. And usually you would take that off as well. Sort of pull that out with a strainer if you want to, but I don't see any of that. So really, we're just gonna let this soak overnight. I think I forgot to tell you, but this is from Tanya Holland's Brown Sugar Kitchen Cookbook. So we'll be back tomorrow to actually cook these beans. Okay, so my beans have been soaking overnight and I have drained them and rinsed them. Now, she says to cook this in a large soup pot, but I checked the instructions and later I have to drain the beans but reserve the cooking liquid. So I am cooking them in my pasta pot, which has that strainer built in. So hopefully that'll work out really well for me instead of having to sort of pour hot liquid through something but save the hot liquid. Anyway, I think this is a good idea. This step, we're just trying to cook the beans until they are tender. And we're not going to add any salt to this because that's something that could make it hard for the beans to get tender. So what we are adding though is a smoked ham hock, a small one. We're adding some garlic, just peeled, don't have to worry about that. And then a quartered yellow onion half. So half of this, it goes in now, and the other half we dice and use later. So all I'm gonna do with this right now is cover it with cold water again by at least an inch. I'm gonna bring it up to a boil and I'm gonna simmer it for about an hour, she says, or until they're tender. Now you want them tender, but not really mushy and falling apart, right? Because you don't want mushy, super mushy baked bean. You don't want baked bean mush, right? So that's our goal here. And I'll show you what it looks like when they're nice and tender. So I've got my beans simmering here. I've got a timer on those. They won't be done for a while, but I'm gonna go ahead and make the sauce that you add these to when they are done, just because that'll take a little while, and let's just go ahead and get it done. So I have some regular bacon that I have diced up, and I've got my pan here that I'm going to put on, I think medium. Let me check real quick. She doesn't say what temperature. I'm going to put it on medium. And then we're going to add to that the rest of the onion that we used in the beans there, but this is diced. I didn't make a particularly small or particularly large dice, just kind of medium. And we're going to cook these until the bacon has sort of rendered its fat and the onions are translucent. She says 5 minutes. I think it's going to take longer than that, but we'll see. I think this has been going for 7 minutes-ish, and my bacon fat is rendering and my onions are starting to get translucent, but I want them to be cooked a little bit more because we're not going to cook this much on the stove. It's going to be baked for a while, but I think we're going to cook it a few more minutes and then we'll call it good. Okay, went for about 2 more minutes. and I'm gonna call it good for now. Let's see. It doesn't say what temperature to keep it at now, even so. I'm gonna leave it, I turned it up to a little bit above medium earlier, but now we're gonna add the rest of our ingredients. These are diced tomatoes, just a can of diced tomatoes with all of its juices goes in. And then we have some just plain ketchup. Which I'm going to put in here. And then I'm going to use this also to measure my next ingredient, which sadly I thought I had some molasses, but I could not find them. So if I have them, I don't know where they are. But I do have some sorghum, which is very similar. This is supposedly a little bit more sweet than molasses, and they suggest reducing it by 1/3. So luckily that's pretty easy with this recipe, so I'm not going to be using the full amount that it calls for of molasses in sorghum, but I'm going to be using sorghum instead of molasses. And we're just going to put that in. Make a little room over here. Okay, now I'm trying to use the same set of measuring spoons for both dry and wet, so I'm gonna try to do all of my dry ingredients first and hope I don't mess up that way. So I'm gonna do, oh yeah, I need some salt, obviously, just some kosher salt. And some pepper. I'm not gonna measure it. Doesn't call for that much. That should be good. Let's see, and now I need some dry mustard. I have Coleman's here, but you can buy just mustard powder, other brands, or just plain. I have a little bit of cayenne pepper as well, which means I have to take the lid off. There we go. And I did that right because I really didn't want to get the cayenne pepper into my Coleman's dry mustard. There we go. Let's see. I have some brown sugar already measured, so there's both molasses or sorghum and brown sugar in this. And then, let's see, I've got my salt, pepper, so we need some Worcestershire sauce. Here we go, Worcestershire sauce. And some, she calls for Tabasco. I have this hot sauce that I'm trying to use up. I don't know what brand it is, but it is a similar type of hot sauce to Tabasco, so I'm just gonna use that. And making sure, yeah, that is how much it calls for. So we're going to simmer this. We've sort of brought it up to a boil already while we've been putting everything in here. We're gonna simmer this for 5 minutes and then it'll be done. So we're just gonna simmer it for 5 minutes and we'll be back when we combine everything. Our timer went off for our beans a little while ago, and I took the ham hock out here because we're supposed to pull whatever meat we can off of this and add it back in, but I wanted to let it cool off a little bit first. So we're going to, my beans are just tender. They're not where you want to eat them yet, but we're gonna bake them in the oven for like 2 hours, so that'll be fine. So I'm gonna pull these out. And drain them. And I need to reserve that water because I'm gonna need some of it at least. There we go. There we go. And now I'm gonna just pick out the onion and the garlic This is a difficult maneuver at this point just because they're so soft. It all separates, but pick out as much as I can. I'm sure it'll be fine. I'm gonna go ahead and pour this into a baking dish. You guys aren't gonna be able to see right now, but I'll move it. There we go. So now I'm just gonna add this sauce. All of it just right in here. I'm gonna see if I can pick the bits of, it's very hot, pork off of here. I feel like it was not, it's really hot. I feel like it was not cooked long enough for it really to fall off the bone. And there's not a whole lot of meat on here. Yeah. I'm gonna let that cool longer and maybe add it in a little bit later. We're also have an optional ingredient of some cooked pork, like pulled pork, which we don't have ready yet. So I might add that in a little bit later. You're supposed to add it in at this stage, but I just don't have all that ready yet, and I'm not, that's too hot. I'm gonna let that cool. So we're gonna cook it for a little while and then we'll stir that stuff in and that'll be fine. So now we're going to gently stir this together. And then we'll moisten it with some of the bean liquid if we need to. I feel like this is pretty moist right now. I might need to add some later, so I'm just gonna leave this on the stove as is and use it if I feel I need to when I add the rest of the stuff. So we're gonna bake this in the oven. I don't think she says to cover it. Let me verify again. She does say to cover this with aluminum foil. So I feel like this is pretty moist. I might add a little bit of this cooking liquid just because it's not looking moist all the way through. Those beans will still need to absorb some liquid. So, all right, I'm gonna cover this with aluminum foil and then we're gonna bake it for about 2 hours. I'm gonna check it after an hour just to be sure, that it's done, and probably, hopefully our pork will be done at that point and we'll add that. All right, see you then. So this is what it looks like after about an hour. Dumping in the bits of ham from the ham hock, and I'm gonna stir this up gently and probably add a little more of the liquid just to keep it moist because we have another hour to go and our pulled pork isn't done yet, so we're not adding that right now, but we'll probably add it before we eat. It'll be fine. On this episode of Cooking the Books with Heather, you watched me make barbecue baked beans from Tanya Holland's Brown Sugar Kitchen cookbook. And I thought these beans had a really great flavor, but mine were really dry. And I feel like that was entirely my fault because I should have put more of the bean cooking liquid in the baked beans when I made them. Baked beans aren't really a thing that I make from scratch all that often, and even my backseat chef was like, no, it doesn't need any more, it doesn't need any more. And then after an hour when I had, oh, I just remembered something. Anyway, after an hour when I had, when I checked it and I even added a little bit more, it still was kind of dry at the end. So when I reheat what we have left over, I'm planning to add just some more water since I'd already gotten rid of all of the bean cooking liquid when I decided that it was too dry. I'll just add some water when I reheat this on the stove in just a saucepan, and we'll see how that goes if I like it better. The flavor was really good. It was just what I look for in a flavor of a baked bean. So the only thing I would change is for me to add more of that cooking liquid, and that's just something that is probably going to be a little bit different depending on the age of your beans and how well they're cooked in the first step and all of that. And we also held them at a sort of warm temp for a while we waited for the rest of our meal to be done. And in fact, I forgot to add some diced cooked pork that I was going to, because things just kind of got crazy at the end there. So maybe I will add some of our leftover pork when I reheat it, and we'll see what we think about it at that point. But these were, again, really easy, don't really need anything. The only thing is you have to remember to sort of soak those beans ahead of time, and it takes quite a bit of time just to cook those beans from dry and then to make the baked bean flavor, imbue that in them. But it's not really hands-on time, and all of that is pretty simple. So if you want to make baked beans from scratch and you haven't before, you should try this recipe. Just remember to add more of that liquid. And I think you would probably prefer it, unless you prefer a drier baked bean. People like all sorts of different things. So if you enjoyed watching me make this, give me a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and come back and watch me make something else next week.